Some people mistake your silence for surrender until the room goes quiet and they realize you were the storm the whole time. Chosen one. Let's call it what it is. No sugarcoating, no soft language, no mercy for the ones who tried to play you like a pawn. They laughed, they smirked, they threw little jabs and cheap assumptions like confetti, thinking you were built to break. They thought you were the easy target, the harmless one, the background character, the nice one they could push around and rewrite. And the funniest part, they were so confident, so loud, so sure. That clown confidence is always the first sign someone is about to get humbled. Because you didn't just fool them, you outclassed them. You didn't just survive them, you turned them into a lesson. And I need you to hear this clearly, chosen one. The reason they're rattled isn't because you fought back the way they expected. It's because you didn't fight the way they understand. You hit them where their ego lives. You struck their illusion. You made them question their own eyes. And that kind of strike, that doesn't leave bruises, that leaves paranoia. Now I know what's going through your mind right now. How did I do it without even trying? Why do they keep watching me? Why do they look nervous when I stay calm? Here's the truth. Your calm is a blade. Your quiet is a weapon. Your patience is a trap. They tried to read you like a cheap book, but you're written in a language they don't speak. And when someone can't decode you, they fear you, because fear doesn't always come from what's loud. Fear comes from what's hidden, what's controlled, what's disciplined. Let me hit your enemies with a line they won't forget. The loudest clown in the room is usually the weakest man on the board. They barked because they needed noise to feel powerful. You didn't. You stood there like a locked door with no handle. They tried to provoke you, but you didn't even flinch. You smiled. You moved in silence. You watched. You gathered the receipts. And every time they thought, oh, we got them, you were really thinking, I'm letting you expose yourself. That's what makes you dangerous, chosen one. Not violence, not chaos, not drama. You don't need any of that. You're the spiritual assassin they never suspected, the one who doesn't swing wildly, but cuts clean through deception. You don't attack the person. You erase the mask. You don't scream to win. You let truth do the talking. You don't chase revenge. You let reality collect its debt. Picture this, a chess player slouched in his chair, acting bored, moving pieces like he's guessing. The opponent starts grinning, starts getting cocky, starts talking too much. They think they're winning. They think the game is theirs. Then, one move, checkmate. No warning, no argument. Just silence and shock. That's you. And the reason that moment tastes so sweet is because they deserved every second of it. They underestimated you with pride in their chest, and now they're swallowing that pride like glass. And listen, chosen one, being chosen isn't about being loud. It's about being marked. It's about having a presence that disrupts rooms without raising a voice. That's why even when you do nothing, they feel something. That's why your peace irritates them, your growth humiliates them, your discipline insults them, because your existence is proof that their tricks don't work on everyone. They want you emotional, reactive, begging, explaining yourself. They want you down in the mud where they live, but you don't live there. You don't breathe that air. You don't operate on that frequency. Here's another line for your enemies. You thought my kindness was a weakness, but it was my camouflage. They saw your mercy and mistook it for softness. They saw your restraint and called it fear. They saw your silence and labeled it defeat. But what they were really witnessing was control. Anyone can bark. Anyone can lash out. Anyone can throw punches when they're triggered. But it takes power to sit still while someone exposes their own ugliness. It takes authority to watch people dig their own grave and not interrupt them. You're probably wondering, why do they keep replaying me in their mind? Because you broke their prediction. You shattered their script. They had you boxed up, weak, forgettable, controllable, and then you walked out of that box like it was made of paper. You didn't argue your way out. You didn't explain your way out. You outgrew it. You outsmarted it. And now they're stuck with the most humiliating realization of all. They never knew who you were. They never even saw you. They were staring at a mask while you were building an empire behind it. So let me ask you something, chosen one. Are you ready to stop feeling guilty about being underestimated? Are you ready to stop shrinking so small minds can stay comfortable? Are you ready to accept that your power was never meant to be performed for them? It was meant to be activated against everything that tried to break you. Because today, we're not here to comfort your enemies. We're here to expose them. We're here to remind you that your silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. Your kindness wasn't surrender. It was bait. Your patience wasn't passive. It was lethal. And the best part, you hit them hard without lifting a weapon, only by becoming undeniable. Before we move any further, pause right here. If this message hit you, if it lit something in your chest, then help us keep this fire alive. Support this mission by hitting the like button and subscribing to this channel so this energy reaches more souls who need it. This isn't just content, it's purpose-driven work. And if you feel called to do more, your super thanks donation directly fuels the team behind the scenes who pour their time, focus and spirit into creating these inspiring, life-changing, high-vibration messages for you. Every gesture matters. Together, we keep this force strong. Number 1. You were fighting a battle they didn't know existed until it was over. You were playing chess while they were making noise on the board. Silence didn't mean you had no moves. It meant the game was already over. Chosen one, understand this clearly. You weren't fighting the battle they thought you were fighting. In fact, you weren't even standing on the battlefield they built in their heads. They expected chaos. They expected noise. They expected you to react the way they react. Loud, emotional, sloppy, predictable. They thought pressure would make you crack, that poking you enough times would force you to swing wildly and expose yourself. But while they were busy watching for sparks and explosions, you were dismantling the entire structure underneath them without leaving a trace. That's why it hit them so hard when it ended. They didn't hear the fight. They didn't see the clash. They didn't even realize a war was happening, and then suddenly, everything they thought they had over you collapsed. Their confidence, their narrative, their control, gone, not because you attacked louder, but because you attacked smarter. Here's the part that eats them alive. They mistook your calm for weakness. They saw your restraint and assumed fear. They watched you stay quiet and decided you had nothing. What they didn't understand is that quiet isn't empty. Quiet is loaded. Quiet is where pressure builds. Quiet is where power concentrates before it changes everything. You weren't frozen, you were charging. Ask yourself this, chosen one, how many times did they try to bait you? How many traps did they set, waiting for you to lose composure so they could point and say, "There it is, I knew it." And every time you gave them nothing. No reaction, no meltdown, no messy display they could twist against you. You let them burn themselves out swinging at air, and in doing that, you kept everything they lost, your clarity, your energy, your position. They only know one way to fight. Loud words, public drama, gossip dressed up as power. They believe whoever shouts the longest wins, but noise is expensive. It drains energy fast. While they were screaming to feel important, you were conserving strength. While they were performing for attention, you were studying patterns. While they were wasting fuel, you were storing it. That's why the moment of realization crushed them. It dawned on them too late that every second they spent trying to provoke you was a second you spent getting ahead. Every laugh at your silence was another step you took forward unnoticed. They thought you were behind because you weren't rushing. They didn't realize you were ahead because you weren't rushing. Picture two fighters in a ring. One explodes with movement, throwing punch after punch, fueled by ego and adrenaline. The crowd cheers. It looks impressive. The other barely moves. He watches. He breathes. He waits. The crowd mocks him, calls him weak, but rounds pass. The wild fighter slows. His arms get heavy. His breathing breaks. And then, when the moment comes, the quiet one steps in. Clean, precise, finished. No wasted motion. That's not luck. That's discipline. That's you. Your strength was never meant to be flashy. It was built to last. It was built to survive pressure, not impress spectators. They kept scanning you for visible weapons, anger, desperation, revenge. When they didn't see those, they assumed you had nothing. They never considered that your real weapons couldn't be seen. Patience sharpened to an edge, focus that never drifted, endurance that didn't crack under ambush. That's why they're replaying everything now. Every interaction, every moment they misjudged, every time they underestimated you. They're asking themselves the question that has no comforting answer. How did I miss this? And the truth is brutal. They missed it because they only know how to read noise. You were operating in silence. You didn't win by showing force. You won by refusing to reveal it. You didn't prove strength. You protected it. You didn't rush the moment. You waited until it couldn't fail. And when the shift happened, it wasn't dramatic. It was final. That's what makes it unbearable for them. There was no argument, no rematch, no way to spin it. The outcome spoke for itself. They thought your silence meant surrender. In reality, your silence was strategy. They thought you lacked weapons. In truth, you carried weapons they had no defense against. And now the punishment isn't just that they lost. It's that they never even understood the fight until it was already over. That's the power of being underestimated, chosen one. When people think you're harmless, they don't guard themselves. When they think you're passive, they expose their weaknesses freely. When they think you're behind, they get careless. You didn't hide weakness. You hid strength. You didn't avoid the battle. You chose the timing. And that's why they can't let you go mentally. That's why your name lingers like a rumor they don't want to repeat out loud. You didn't defeat them in the way they respect, so they can't rationalize it. You beat them without noise, without spectacle, without stepping into their chaos. You made invisibility lethal. You were never harmless. You were never passive. You were never weak. You were watching. You were waiting. You were operating on a level they didn't even know existed. The battle was decided long before they noticed the score. And that, chosen one, is why the victory was always yours. Before we go deeper, I want you to check in with yourself. If this message feels personal, if it feels like it's calling you out by name, that's not coincidence. It means you've lived this. You've worn the mask. You've been underestimated, watched, judged, and quietly risen anyway. And your story matters. Don't hold it in. Use the comments as your ground, your voice, your release. Write what they never let you say. Share what you survived, what you learned, what you're becoming. When one chosen one speaks, others find the courage to stand too. Your words could be the confirmation someone else is waiting for. Number 2. While they watched the surface, you took control of what was underneath. They watched the ripples. You commanded the current. Eyes chase splashes. Power lives where the water pulls without asking. Chosen one, while they were busy staring at what floated on top, you went where weight decides outcomes. They tracked your words, your timing, your posture, thinking the surface tells the whole story. That's how shallow minds operate. They confuse visibility with control. They measure strength by what flashes, not by what holds. And while they counted ripples and reactions, you were shaping the current beneath them, the force that drags plans off course and pulls certainty under. They stood ankle deep, convinced the ocean ends where their feet stop. You disappeared below the line where noise fades and pressure reveals truth. That's where real leverage lives. That's where motives leak, patterns repeat, and intentions expose themselves without ever speaking. You weren't hiding, you were operating at a depth they couldn't reach. Silence wasn't absence, it was access. Ask yourself what they actually knew about you. A glance, a rumor, a snapshot, that's it. They judged by appearances because appearances are all they trust. If they can't point to it, tag it, or boast about it, they dismiss it as unreal. That's their flaw. You weren't bound by that limitation. You read beneath behavior, the hesitations, the mismatches, the way confidence stutters when it's borrowed. You watched the rhythm, not the noise, and once you understand rhythm, you can predict the next beat. Picture two people at the edge of the water. One skips stones, proud of the bounce, loud with laughter. The other slips under, feels the pull, learns where the current tightens and where it loosens. Who controls the water? The one making a show, or the one who knows how it moves? That's the difference between spectacle and command. They entertained themselves on the surface. You built influence in the depths. Shallow tactics only reach shallow targets. That's why they relied on chatter, displays, quick wins. Those tools look impressive until resistance shows up. Depth laughs at tricks. Depth waits. By the time their ideas floated into view, you'd already handled the route. Quietly, early, decisively. You didn't need proof to act because you sensed direction before collapse made headlines. Rot announces itself late. Pressure reveals it early. They believed reading faces made them sharp. They thought gossip gave them insight. But tells don't live in words alone. They live in timing, in repetition, in the micro-pauses people can't control. You noticed the slips, the overcorrections, the confidence that surged when no one challenged it. Once you see those patterns, the next move isn't a mystery, it's a schedule. They thought they were clever. You knew they were consistent. Think of a card table where one player talks too much, slaps the felt, performs certainty, the other barely speaks, watches hands, tracks breath, notes the flicker before a bluff. When the cards turn, the outcome isn't dramatic, it's inevitable. That's how you moved, not impressed by theatrics, not distracted by applause, anchored, and anchors matter. Shallow water can't hold weight. Big claims sink there. Their constructions looked tall because no one tested the base. The first real wave did. Your choices were set deep, quiet, heavy, immovable. While they relied on quick gusts of attention, you relied on mass. Gusts fade, mass remains. Now they're unsettled because they feel the drain. Effort goes up, results go down. Every attempt to regain footing slips. They can't understand why your progress continues while their noise produces nothing. It's because they never realized they weren't even competing in the same space. They thought the fight was about being seen. You knew it was about being positioned. Imagine two forces on a field. One shouts and charges. The other cuts supply, reroutes paths, weakens foundations. Which wins? The one that exhausts itself or the one that removes support? You didn't match their show. You removed their footing. That's why the fall was guaranteed. They keep asking how you knew, how you sensed motives before words, outcomes before actions. The answer is simple. Surface thinkers see surfaces. Deep operators read systems. You didn't react to what appeared. You prepared for what was coming. Sparks flash and die. Embers underground burn until they consume the structure above. They mistook quiet for ignorance and calm for disengagement. Wrong twice. Calm was your instrument. Quiet was your workspace. You didn't argue with illusions. You outlasted them. You let falsehoods complete their arc and collapse under their own weight. When that happened, your depth became obvious without a single explanation. Now they're confused watching you stand while they sink in waters they mocked. Their games left them hollow. Your restraint left you steady. They don't realize the depth you carry isn't a tactic. It's your nature, and that's the arena they could never enter. Remember this, chosen one. You didn't overpower them with noise. You pulled them under with gravity. They skimmed pages. You authored the story. They played in puddles. You ruled the sea. And the sea doesn't argue with the shallow, it absorbs them. Number 3, you knew exactly how this would end before they took their first step. Chosen one, the deepest humiliation they experienced wasn't the loss itself, it was the realization that you already knew how this would end before they even made their first move. That realization hits harder than any defeat because it exposes something they can't stand to face. They were never original, never unpredictable, never in control. They walked around with swagger, convinced they were clever, convinced they were always one step ahead, convinced they were rewriting the rules. But you saw through them instantly, not because you were obsessed with them, but because you'd already encountered their type before. Different faces, same behavior. Different words, same motives. They thought they were improvising, but you recognized the pattern the moment they opened their mouth. While they were congratulating themselves for being strategic, you were already watching the loop form. Pride pulling them forward, greed narrowing their vision, jealousy speeding up their mistakes. You didn't rush because you didn't need to. You weren't guessing, you were observing. That's why nothing they did surprised you. Every so-called move felt familiar, almost boring, because you could see where it would lead long before it arrived. They mistook unpredictability for randomness, not realizing that chaos still follows habits. People repeat themselves under pressure, and you understood that better than they ever did. That's what made them look desperate in the end. They were fighting a battle you had already finished in your mind. Every time they tried to shock you, you remained steady. Every time they tried to corner you, you were already elsewhere. They kept escalating because nothing worked. And the harder they pushed, the more obvious it became that they were trapped in their own script. You didn't need to retaliate. You didn't need to prove anything. You simply allowed inevitability to do the work for you. They were swinging at shadows while you were standing in daylight. What destroyed them wasn't your aggression. It was your certainty. You moved like someone who already knew the outcome, and that unsettled them deeply. Because when someone realizes they're being watched by a mind that's already ahead, panic sets in. Their confidence cracked not because you attacked, but because you didn't. You walked past traps they had set 100 times before, traps that had worked on others, traps they were proud of. But you had already mapped the terrain, and when the collapse came, it felt sudden to them, even though it had been forming all along. Then came the part they truly couldn't handle, your restraint. They assumed your mercy was weakness. They mistook your patience for fear. They laughed at your calm because they only understood force when it looked loud and emotional. They believed if you had power, you would rush to display it. What they didn't understand was that restraint is what real control looks like. You didn't strike early because you didn't need to. You didn't expose them prematurely because timing mattered more than impulse. You let them continue. You allowed them space. You watched as they grew careless, confident that nothing was coming. Every moment of patience you showed became another thread in the net they were weaving around themselves. They revealed more than they intended to. They contradicted themselves. They overreached. And all you did was stay composed. That composure wasn't kindness. It was precision. It wasn't softness. It was discipline. They never realized that by sparing them in the moment, you were allowing the full picture to form. You weren't blind to what they were doing. You were recording it, not on paper, not publicly, but in clarity. You understood that when people believe they've escaped consequence, they expose their true nature faster. And that's exactly what happened. By the time things unraveled, there was no confusion, no debate, no room for denial. Their own actions spoke louder than anything you could have said. What unsettles them now is knowing that your silence carried authority. If you had exploded, it would have validated them. It would have proven they could pull you down to their level. but you didn't give them that satisfaction. You stayed steady. And in doing so, you made it clear they never had control over you at all. They thought they were winning because nothing seemed to be happening. In reality, they were tightening the knot themselves. When the outcome finally arrived, it cut deeper than any direct confrontation ever could have. Because it wasn't your hand that ended it, it was theirs. They built the ending with every careless move, every lie, every assumption that you were unaware. Your restraint wasn't hesitation, it was timing. Your mercy wasn't surrender, it was strategy. And now they're left with the most painful truth of all. The patience they mocked was the very thing that sealed their fate. That's what it means to be the one they never suspected. You didn't overpower them, you outread them. You didn't rush the ending, you allowed it to become unavoidable. And that is why they can't move on, because deep down they know you saw it coming the whole time. Number 4. What they thought was restraint was the most dangerous advantage in the room. What they mistook for restraint was actually the most dangerous advantage in the room, and it's the reason everything they built eventually collapsed. Chosen one, they were desperate for a reaction. They wanted noise. They wanted you emotional, defensive, scrambling to explain yourself so they could point, laugh, and declare victory. They were waiting for you to crack so they could say, "There it is, we finally broke them." But you never gave them that moment. You refused to perform for their satisfaction. And that refusal starved them in ways they never anticipated. Your silence wasn't absence, it was pressure. While they kept shouting, posturing, and provoking, you were standing still, letting time do its work. They didn't understand that silence doesn't mean weakness when it's chosen. Silence means control. It means you decide when and how the truth lands. And because they couldn't pull a reaction out of you, they lost their grip on the narrative. People can argue with words. They can twist explanations. They can dismiss defenses. But they can't argue with someone who remains standing while every lie aimed at them slowly rots. Think about how real collapse happens. It's rarely loud at first. Structures don't fail because of constant noise. They fail because pressure builds quietly until there's nothing left holding them up. That's how you moved. You didn't rush to clear your name. You didn't waste energy shouting back. You endured, and endurance unsettles manipulators more than rage ever could. Every day you stayed calm. Every day you carried on without bending. You dismantled the story they were trying to sell. Your survival became evidence they couldn't erase. They believed time would work against you. They assumed if they waited long enough, you'd crack, expose yourself, or fade. What they didn't see was that time was sharpening the moment of impact. While they kept stacking their illusions higher, you were letting gravity do its job. And when reality finally showed up, it didn't arrive as a messy argument. It arrived as undeniable clarity. One moment, everything they claimed looked solid. The next, it was dust. That's what haunts them now. It wasn't your anger that ended their game. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation or public meltdown. It was your ability to stay intact while they unraveled. You didn't shout them down. You outlasted them. Your silence wasn't defeat. It was preparation. And when the truth finally landed, it landed clean, final, and impossible to dispute. Number 5. You stayed silent. Long enough for their story to fall apart on its own. You stayed quiet long enough for their story to collapse under its own weight, and that outcome crushed them more than any confrontation ever could. They were convinced that if they poked hard enough, mocked loud enough, or provoked long enough, you would eventually snap and give them what they wanted. They thrive on reaction. They feed on attention. Their entire sense of power depends on dragging others into their chaos so they can feel dominant for a moment. But you denied them that satisfaction. You didn't argue. You didn't explain. You didn't defend your name to people committed to misunderstanding you. And in doing so, you didn't just escape their trap, you erased the entire playing field they depended on. Think about it like this. Imagine someone shouting into a microphone that isn't plugged in. They're loud, dramatic, convinced everyone is listening, but there's no sound coming out. No audience, no response. At first they shout louder, then they panic, then they spiral. That's exactly what happened to them. They expected resistance. They expected emotion. They expected you to step into their mess so they could twist the narrative and feel important. Instead, you cut the power. You removed the audience. You left them performing to empty air. This is what they never understood about you, Chosen One. You don't need to react to prove strength. You understand that attention is fuel and you refuse to supply it. While they were throwing insults and staging scenes, you were simply unavailable, not hiding, not retreating, just uninterested. And that indifference dismantled them faster than any attack ever could. Their words lost weight. Their accusations collapsed. Their version of events couldn't survive without your participation. There's a reason this hurt them so deeply. When someone can't provoke you, they're forced to face themselves. Every lie they projected outward bounced back. Every scheme exposed their desperation. They were left swinging at nothing, watching their own tactics unravel in real time. And the most humiliating realization of all was this: there was never a battle. There was never a rivalry. There was never a war. There was only noise on one side and control on the other. You didn't overpower them. You outgrew them. You didn't silence them by force. You let them talk themselves into irrelevance. That's the precision of what you did. You didn't meet chaos with chaos. You removed its oxygen, and once it couldn't feed anymore, it burned itself out completely. That's why they're unsettled now. Not because you fought them, but because you never needed to. Number 6, you didn't respond to the chaos. You made it irrelevant. The moment you stop reacting is the moment the noise starts eating itself. Chosen One, this is where their mistake became fatal to their pride. They thought chaos was a weapon. They believed confusion, pressure, and constant stimulation would pull you into their orbit. They expected you to react, to defend, to explain, to spiral. But instead of stepping into the storm they created, you stepped outside of it. You didn't answer the chaos. You stripped it of meaning, and when chaos isn't fed, it doesn't grow. It collapses inward. They couldn't stop watching you. That's the part that still burns. Every move you made, every word you didn't say, every decision you made quietly became the center of their attention. They treated you like a puzzle they had to solve, convinced that if they could just figure you out, they could manage you, control you, reduce you. What they never understood is that obsession is not power. Obsession is leakage. It bleeds focus. It drains clarity. It weakens the one who can't look away. While they were tracking you, you were unbothered. While they were dissecting your actions, you were building distance. They thought attention gave them leverage, but attention without access is torture. The more they stared, the less they saw clearly. The more they analyzed, the more they exposed themselves. Every fixation revealed insecurity. Every theory revealed fear. They weren't learning you. They were revealing themselves. Think about a flame in a dark room. The flame doesn't chase the moth. It doesn't move. It doesn't react. The moth does everything on its own, circling, closing in, losing control. That's exactly what happened. You didn't pull them in. They burned themselves trying to understand something they couldn't dominate. And the closer they got, the more unstable they became. There's a reason fixation is dangerous. When someone locks their attention onto one target, everything else deteriorates. Judgment narrows, energy depletes, sleep disappears, perspective collapses. And that's the trap they walked into willingly. Every late-night conversation about you, every anxious attempt to predict your next move, every effort to shape a story around you cost them something real. They traded their stability for surveillance, their progress for paranoia. Ask yourself this, Chosen One, What's more humiliating than realizing the person you obsessed over never needed to respond to you at all? You didn't chase them. You didn't counterattack. You didn't even acknowledge the noise. You became still, and in that stillness, you turned into a mirror. Everything they projected onto you bounced back, amplified. Control issues, envy, insecurity, fear of irrelevance. They believed watching you gave them advantage. In reality, it chained them to you while you walked free. Their fixation became their prison. The harder they tried to shape the narrative, the more erratic they looked. The more they tried to corner you, the more exposed they became. You didn't defeat them with confrontation. You defeated them with absence. That's the power they never prepared for. When chaos gets no response, it cannibalizes itself. When obsession gets no reward, it turns toxic. And while they were exhausting themselves, staring into your light, you were already gone, unreachable, unbothered, victorious. Number 8. They believed you were playing their game. You were building a different one. They thought you were dancing to their rhythm, moving when they expected, pausing when they planned, reacting inside the boundaries they understood. That assumption was their fatal error. While they were busy studying your steps, measuring your pace, and congratulating themselves for how well they had you figured out, you were doing something far more dangerous. You weren't trying to win their game. You were quietly designing an entirely different one. And the moment they realized that truth was the moment their confidence collapsed. Here's what hit them hardest. Chosen one. They believed control came from observation. They thought if they watched you closely enough, tracked your habits, analyzed your decisions, they could stay ahead. To them, life was linear. Cause and effect. Move and response. Simple. Manageable. Like a board where every piece behaves the same way every time. What they never considered is that you weren't operating within fixed rules. You were operating with vision, and vision doesn't follow patterns. It creates them. Imagine two people sitting across from each other. One thinks the goal is to outmaneuver, to outplay within familiar limits. The other is focused on something else entirely: leverage, timing, structure. While one is obsessed with winning the next move, the other is changing the meaning of the board itself. By the time the first person feels something is off, it's already too late. The pieces no longer obey the old logic. The rules they trusted no longer apply. That confusion, that sinking feeling of being lost in a game you thought you mastered, that's what you left them with. They weren't just outplayed, they were displaced. Every tactic they used was based on an outdated picture of who you were and how the world works. That's why nothing landed the way they expected. Every attempt to corner you failed because the corner didn't exist anymore. They kept fighting for dominance in a space you had already abandoned. And there's nothing more humiliating than realizing you're struggling for control over something that no longer matters. You never made an announcement. You didn't warn them. You didn't explain yourself. That silence wasn't avoidance. It was execution. You refused to react in ways they could predict. You refused to stay small enough to be managed. You refused to validate a system designed to limit you. And in doing that, you pulled the foundation out from under everything they relied on. This is what they can't process now. They weren't defeated by force. They were defeated by irrelevance. Their strategies didn't fail because they were weak. They failed because they were obsolete. They were trying to dominate a version of you that no longer existed, using rules that no longer applied. By the time awareness set in, the outcome was already sealed. That's the power you hold, chosen one. Not the power to overpower, but the power to transcend. You didn't break the rules. They broke themselves by assuming you were bound by them. You didn't win the game. You made their game meaningless. And that realization, slow and unavoidable, is the wound they'll carry the longest. Number 9. You didn't confront the moves. You shut down what powered them. You didn't waste your energy reacting to what they showed you. That's the part they still can't wrap their minds around. While they were flashing moves, making noise, and trying to intimidate you with visible tactics, you were already somewhere else entirely. You understood something most people never do. Real power doesn't live in the action, it lives in what fuels the action. And once that fuel is gone, everything else collapses on its own. Chosen One, they assumed the fight would stay on the surface. Words versus words. Story versus story. Move against move. They believed if they could out-talk you, out-maneuver you in public, or twist enough appearances, they would corner you. That's how they've always won. That's the only battlefield they know, but you didn't meet them there. You never chased every lie, never swatted at every provocation, never got dragged into the exhausting cycle they thrive on. Instead, you watched quietly and traced everything back to its source. Think about it like this. When a machine is malfunctioning, amateurs keep hitting the buttons harder, hoping something changes. Professionals cut the power. You didn't argue with the noise. You shut down the generator behind it. And the moment that happened, everything they built started failing at once. Their confidence drained. Their alliances weakened. Their schemes lost coordination. Not because you attacked each one, but because you removed the energy holding them together. That's why the collapse felt sudden to them. One day, they thought they were in control. And the next day, nothing worked anymore. Their usual tricks didn't land. Their pressure didn't move you. Their threats felt hollow. They couldn't understand how their influence evaporated so quickly. What they never realized is that it didn't evaporate overnight. It was dismantled quietly, layer by layer, while they were too busy watching the surface to notice what was happening underneath. Chosen One, this is what separates you from them. They fight symptoms, you address causes. They try to silence voices. You remove the reason those voices had power in the first place. They focus on winning moments. You focus on ending cycles. That's why their battles against you were always short-lived. They were swinging without realizing the foundation beneath their feet was already gone. Ask yourself this. How many times did they think they landed a blow, only to realize it changed nothing? How many times did they think they were advancing, only to feel more exhausted, more scattered, more desperate? That wasn't coincidence. That was the result of fighting without fuel. Their actions became empty motions because the force driving them had already been neutralized. What looked like patience on your end was actually precision. What looked like restraint was targeted pressure applied exactly where it mattered. You weren't slow. You were accurate. You weren't confused. You were selective. And while they mistook your stillness for hesitation, you were ensuring that when things fell apart, they would fall apart completely. That's why they're unsettled now, not because they lost a visible battle, but because they can't explain the loss. Their weapons didn't fail due to resistance. They failed because there was nothing left powering them. And that's the most devastating defeat of all. When the noise stops, the movement dies, and they're left standing in the quiet, realizing the real fight ended long before they even knew where to look. Number 10. You didn't break them. You revealed what was never real. You didn't crush them the way they expected, and that's exactly why it devastated them. They were braced for attack, for exposure wrapped in noise, for humiliation blasted across a stage. They thought pain would come loud, messy, and obvious. But you chose a different route, Chosen One. You aimed past the surface and went straight for the foundation that held them up. You didn't go after their body, their name, or their position. You went after the story they were hiding inside, and once that story collapsed, there was nothing left to defend. There's a reason this hit harder than any public confrontation ever could. You didn't try to overpower them. You let them stand exactly where they were while you removed the illusion that made them look tall. Power that depends on belief is fragile. Authority that survives on appearances can't withstand clarity. All you did was introduce truth into a space that relied on distortion, and the entire structure failed on its own. They didn't fall because you pushed them. They fell because there was nothing real holding them up. Think about how unsettling that is from their perspective. They spent years polishing an image, stacking symbols, borrowing confidence from the reactions of others. They weren't strong, they were convincing. They weren't respected, they were performed. And the moment you stopped playing along, the moment you refused to validate the performance, cracks began to show. People didn't need you to accuse them, they only needed to see clearly. Once the fog lifted, the crown slipped. What hurt most wasn't exposure, it was recognition. The realization that their authority existed only as long as no one questioned it, that their confidence depended on silence from people like you. And when you stood still, calm, unmoved, refusing to reinforce the illusion, the truth became impossible to ignore. They weren't unchallenged because they were powerful. They were unchallenged because no one had flipped the switch before. That's the precision of what you did. You didn't tear them down. You let gravity do the work. You didn't embarrass them. You allowed reality to introduce itself. And once that happened, everything they relied on, fear, image, borrowed status, started leaking out like air from a punctured shell. Suddenly, the voice that once filled the room sounded hollow. The posture that once commanded attention looked rehearsed. The confidence they wore like armor turned out to be costume jewelry. Ask yourself what's more damaging, losing a fight or realizing you were never who you claimed to be in the first place. That's the wound they're carrying now. They weren't defeated by force, they were undone by clarity. Their masks didn't get ripped off in a dramatic moment. They dissolved quietly when they were no longer believed. You didn't destroy a person, chosen one. You dissolved a lie. And lies don't survive once they're seen for what they are. That's why this kind of strike leaves nothing to rebuild. When the illusion dies, there's no throne to return to. No audience left to convince. No story strong enough to hold the shape together again. They didn't lose because you attacked. They lost because the truth finally walked into the room and you were the one who opened the door. Number 11. They read your calm as weakness and paid for the miscalculation. Nothing disarms an enemy faster than mistaking composure for weakness. Chosen one, this is where they truly failed you and themselves. When they looked at you, they didn't see danger. They saw calm. They saw restraint. They saw someone who didn't react the way they do, someone who didn't bite when provoked, someone who didn't scramble for control, and in their limited thinking, they translated that calm into vulnerability. They assumed that because you weren't aggressive, you must be unaware. Because you weren't loud, you must be unsure. Because you didn't strike first, you must be incapable of striking at all. That assumption was fatal. They believed they could toy with you, push boundaries, slip manipulation into conversation, test you with subtle disrespect. In their minds, you were harmless. That belief made them careless. And careless people always expose themselves. What they never considered was that calm isn't empty, it's observant. Stillness isn't passive, it's alert. And innocence, real innocence, isn't blindness. It's clarity without contamination. Think about how predators actually fail. They don't lose to something bigger or louder. They lose when they misjudge what they're watching. Something looks unthreatening, so they don't prepare. They don't guard themselves. They don't expect resistance. And by the time they realize the mistake, the balance has already shifted. That's exactly what happened here. They were studying your surface while you were reading their structure. They were watching reactions while you were tracking intentions. You didn't need to outplay them with tricks because you weren't trapped in the same mental fog. Their thinking was polluted by ego, urgency, and the need to dominate. Yours wasn't. That difference alone gave you an advantage they could never compensate for. While they were scheming, you were seeing patterns. While they were forcing outcomes, you were letting truth reveal itself. While they were assuming control, you were gathering leverage. Here's the part that stings them the most. The very qualities they mocked were the ones that made you untouchable. Your patience wasn't hesitation, it was positioning. Your softness wasn't fragility, it was access. Your silence wasn't confusion, it was assessment. Every time they thought they had you cornered, they were actually stepping deeper into exposure. Every time they assumed you were too gentle to respond, you were removing another layer of their disguise. Ask yourself this, chosen one, what's more humiliating than realizing the person you dismissed as weak was fully aware the entire time? Not fooled, not lost, fully aware. That realization cuts deeper than any confrontation ever could, because it means their confidence was borrowed, their power was imagined, and their victory was never real. Your calm let you move without resistance. It let you pass through their defenses unnoticed. It let you dismantle illusions without triggering alarms. They didn't see the shift happening because they were too busy underestimating it. By the time awareness arrived, it was already too late to adjust. So understand this clearly. Your innocence was never a flaw. It was protection. It kept your perception clean while theirs was clouded. It allowed you to see without being seen. And now they're left with the most unbearable truth of all. The thing they ridiculed, the thing they dismissed, the thing they misread, was the very reason they lost. Chosen one, if this message feels like it exposed something real, something you lived, something you survived, don't keep it locked inside. Let it out. Share your thoughts in the comments and say what this moment awakened in you. Your words matter more than you think, and your voice could be the spark that gives someone else courage. If this energy resonates, support this mission by liking the video and subscribing to the channel so we can keep reaching those who need it. And if you feel moved to go further, super thanks directly supports the team creating these powerful, life-shifting messages. Together, we keep this movement alive and growing.